We are not here to be popular, we are here to compete. Remember those words? Eddie Howe. Well, now Newcastle United, they are popular, especially on the road, and that's because they've become a soft touch. And in this video, I'm going to explore the reasons as to why, because it's something they really do have to sort out. Well, hello again from the streets of Gosforth. Now, I thought I'd try something different with the impactful opening there. It's what all the YouTube experts tell you. You've got to try and grab people's attention. So are you grabbed? I tell you who's not doing enough grabbing, enough grappling, enough time wasting, enough kicking, enough biting, whatever you want to call it. And that's Newcastle United. And as I touched on there at the very start, we really do need to look at where have Eddie Howe's nasty boys gone? Where have the streetwise mags gone? The team who won, quite rightly, comparison to Diego Simeone and the dark art of Atletico Madrid? Well, because right now you see them, and I think this is confined to on the road, especially where they've lost 11 times this season compared to 3 last year. They are something of a soft touch. We saw it down at Manchester United on Wednesday night. Eddie Howe was really telling in the press conference afterwards, when he's straight into territory, well, I don't think he's really gone before, where he's talking about the character and the mentality of his team. It's what we explored at this morning's press conference. It was my question to him, where have those streetwise traits gone? Why now, when they travel away from home, are they easier to play against, easier to beat, and not converting on what was on Wednesday night a performance that was decent enough, good enough to win the game, just without that element, that ruthlessness, that nastiness, that those street smarts, really, just to see home a result that for me was there for the taking. That's what we spoke about this morning. But to understand why we've arrived at this conversation, you've got to go back to what they were like previously, and the famous quote from Eddie Howe, where every week Newcastle seemed to be winding up their opponents, and it won a lot of coverage beyond the Northeast. It was treated very differently within the Northeast. You know, we looked at it and we said, you know, good on you. It was actually quite amusing to watch. We were joking amongst ourselves in the press box at the time as to how blatant some of it was, but it was so canny and it was so successful. We had no complaints. Like I say, press in different parts of the country and different observers, they weren't as impressed. I remember an Everton supporting colleague after the game up at St James's last season, I think, when Newcastle won 1-0, they said that Newcastle kicked us off the park. Well, kicked, played, depends on your interpretation. I just thought Newcastle that night were really clever, were really smart, as they were in a lot of games, be it at home or away. And certainly when you went on the road with Newcastle, you could see they almost revelled in that. And you had from Eddie Howe, who was, you know, he was quieter with it, but don't be fooled, he was the one who was winding them up and sending them out with that instruction in the first place. The more demonstrative character on the touchline was Jason Tindall, you know, for all of his lovely, beautiful, handsome looks, he could turn ugly when needed, you know, the guard dog there. You know, where's that gone with even with Tindall on the sideline now? You know, he's lost his bite a little bit. Come on, he needs to get it back. But what happens on the pitch ultimately is what matters. And you know, we saw there last season, Jamal Lascelles was booked, I think, twice all season, twice as an unused substitute for disrupting throw-ins, disrupting quick restarts. You had Callum Wilson one game, I think it was Fulham, before Alexander Mitrovic takes a penalty. Callum Wilson scuffs the penalty spot. I think it was in the same game as well. Joe Linton listened in to Marco Silva giving instruction to his team on the sideline during a break in play. Remember Jacob Murphy waving goodbye to the Southampton player when he was sent off? You know, whether they were snarling, whether they were smiling, they were finding a way to get under the skin of the opposition. I remember writing in copy last year, you know, they are clipping wings and ruffling feathers with it. Lovely line, worth repeating. So, but anyway, the point I made was it became a real narrative and a real theme of the season, and it became almost a self-fulfilling type of thing for Newcastle, because they really did buy into it. Now, every time we mentioned Simeone and dark arts to Eddie Howe, he played it with a straight bat, but he did so with a smile on his face, because he knew it existed, and he knew it was taking his team from the bottom of the table, where they were absolutely, the team he inherited they weren't very good on so many levels, but they were also a soft touch as well. You know, they're so easy to play against, so subservient at times that there was a real inevitability about too many games with that team. Now, a lot of the players are still the same players. So there was clearly a mindset shift. There was clearly something they were doing to add that edge that made them so difficult to play with and peed so many people off, for want of a better expression. And Eddie Howe had, don't forget, during his time out of the game, he'd spent time in Madrid and he didn't come back raving about Picasso or Dali. You know, he'd come back raving about Diego Simeone, and it was what he took from seeing Simeone train, from seeing Madrid play, and that was evident in what Newcastle did last year on that journey from 19th to 4th and into the Champions League. Well, this season, this time round, and as I said earlier, it was the question I put to Eddie Howe, and his answer was, it comes back to personnel. He said, you know, they've been missing key players, and he name-checked Joelinton. Now, I understand that to a degree because, of course, you know, you're missing players like Joelinton who set the tone for that. And Joelinton was wonderful. He was my player of the season last year because I thought he impacted the most on the opposition and on his own team as well. I just thought he was a real player of impact on so many levels. Now, without Joelinton for the bulk of this season, of course, that is going to have make a difference. But I also think that's a little bit too easy, and I think it's got to be something that comes from above, from the management. You know, it was almost like Newcastle last year. It was something you could imagine them working on in training. You know, the tactical injuries in stoppage time, just at the right time when they had a lead, to break up play, to break the momentum of the opposition. It was like clockwork at times. It was tremendous to watch. You knew it was coming, but it was so effective, and it took them to where they wanted to go. Now, this year in Manchester United was a real case in point. There was one ball, I think, in the first half where Kobe Mainoo, 18-year-old, gets it in the middle of midfield, brings it down his chest, spins away from his man, opens up play. Now, where's those little tactical fouls? Where's the nastiness to be on him in the first place? Why is another teenager, a young man at least, and Amad Diallo allowed just to drift in field from the wing without any sort of resistance? How all of a sudden now do Newcastle look really susceptible from set pieces, whereas once over they pushed the rules? You know, they didn't give away penalties on the back of it, but they grappled and they manhandled and they nipped and they pulled to the maximum extent into the benefit of their team. All that is gone now as well, and you know, that even extends itself just to simple things like not marking men. It's just they've become, I don't use this word lightly, but I imagine when Newcastle come to town as an away team now, you know, it is relatively popular. Crystal Palace, you know, so the Crystal Palace seem to revel and enjoy playing against Newcastle, some of the space they were afforded. That was a performance that was really off. Luton away is perhaps the best, worst, whatever interpretation of that word, example of the season. You know, just before Christmas, where it was apparent after 10, 15 minutes, there was something really soft about Newcastle. Soft, come on, I never thought we'd be using those words and having this conversation. Now, a quick caveat insert into this. It's not is it a criticism? I don't know. You know, Eddie Howe is still the manager, still the right man. He's got to work out a way to correct this because even still they are on the last game, going into the last game of the season, they've got a chance to qualify for Europe. And given all the mitigation of the injuries, the loss of key personnel like Joelinton, Sandro Tonali suspension, the schedule, the refereeing decisions at certain times, the cup draws, everything else, to put themselves in this position, I still think it would represent a very successful year if they can qualify for Europe, which I think they will do, by the way. And I think, you know, for that, Eddie Howe would deserve great credit. But there are things to learn from. I've touched on it in previous videos, having to learn about the diagnosis and treatment of injuries. Someone joked with me the other day, Newcastle don't have a return to play programme, they've got a return to injury programme. And you can see why that joke is made, because there's been so many recurring injuries. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked from the point I was making about learning from this season. And one thing they've got to learn and got to look at is how to get this back. And it was the question I asked of Eddie Howe, and then some of my colleagues picked up on it. You know, do they need more warriors? Do they need to sign warriors? They've got a few warriors, but do they need warriors? Now, Eddie's answer was that it's about striking a balance, really. You've got to be delicate. You can't just go down one route and then you lose the quality elsewhere. That's why I say, I don't think it is just personnel. I think it's got to be coached. It's got to be instilled. It's got to be something Newcastle work on. You know, wasting time, disrupting play, gaining those little marginal advantages, those little marginal gains they were so good at this year. And sadly, this year for them, I think it's really cost them on the road. When you look at the difference, last year they lost 3 away from home. They've already lost 11 this season. Now, the difference is 8 draws. And if Newcastle can turn 8 of those defeats this year into draws, they drew 8 away from home last season. Now, that's an extra 8 points, and we'd still have been talking about the Champions League, going into the last week of the season. So that is where they've got to improve, where they've got to look at. I don't think it's just as easy as getting people back. I think there's got to be a wider collective approach to it and make a deliberate, concerted effort to get the nasty boys back together. Now, the 2 guys in the white van who shouted whatever it was out the window there to try and disrupt my video back then, that's the sort of attitude Newcastle need. Perhaps they knew what I was talking about. They need disruptors, So yeah, good on you, lads. But no, on the news elements from this morning as well, quick little update on fitness. Callum Wilson, as we expected, will be fine for Brentford on Sunday. And yeah, I did put it to Eddie Howe later that, there's nothing wrong with Mike Bassett, nothing wrong with 4-4-2. Why don't you go for it? And I honestly, I don't know if you will do this, but I said this a couple of weeks ago, didn't I? That I thought Newcastle during the closing games of the season should have gone with Isak and Wilson in attack. It hasn't played out. And for me, for all of the different reasons, and I've just spent 10 minutes there talking about mentality and characteristics and everything else. But if Newcastle had Wilson and Isak, Wilson hasn't been there because of illness. Isak's been a clearly diminished version also because of illness. If Newcastle had those 2 players during the last 2 games, when they've created enough chances, had enough territory against both Brighton and Manchester United, I honestly think would have been talking about a completely different picture, where Newcastle now would have been in control of 6th position. As it is, they're fighting to cling on to potentially, 7th, if not dropping into 8th. So Anthony Gordon, he is a slight doubt, ever so slightly. Got that nasty kick on his ankle on Wednesday night. I would expect Gordon to be fine. Tino Livramento, he won't play. But the 2 big calls he's got to make for me, and again, question I asked Eddie this morning, Joe Linton, Nick Pope, do they come back in? Now, Eddie said it's possible, all options are there, but they've got to be mindful also. Are the players right? Are the players ready? And they've got next season to think about. It's no good coming back in if someone is then going to break down and, to quote the manager, be out for 6 months. So I get that, but this is big on Sunday. This is huge. This could have a real say on the future direction of the club, whether it's European football or not European football. And I was going to go into here, is it better for them with or better for them without? I can make an argument both sides of that. Let's see actually where they land on Sunday, what position in the table they're in. Regardless of where they finish, they're going to have to rely on the FA Cup final is going to have some bearing. But I think after that game, we'll explore more the pros and cons of being in or out of Europe. Now, with a little newsy bits from this week, a couple of items I brought you in my NUFC notebook yesterday. Newcastle this summer. Now, of course, they're going to Japan, something else I told you a few weeks ago, but they're also going to go to the Adidas HQ in Bavaria this summer. I think they'll spend 5, 6, 7 days there. There's a couple of games, I think, potentially penciled in. We don't know the exact details yet as to whether they're going to be behind closed doors or in public. More news is awaited on that. Finer details still being finalised. Also within there, Newcastle are going to make 2 key appointments off the pitch, not just a sporting director. They're also going to bring in a performance director as well, and perhaps the performance director can look at those streetwise traits that are missing. He or she will be responsible for the likes of overseeing the splitting the sporting director role, what Dan Ashworth had, into 2 almost. Dougie Freeman, we expect him still to be the most likely candidate for the sporting director. That will have a recruitment focus. The other side, medicine, performance analysis, everything under those umbrellas, that these long words and fancy titles and departments that marginal gains, that's what it comes down to, doesn't it? We're all sounding very Ineos here. And so, of course, Newcastle will also head straight to Australia after the game on Sunday. Now, we spoke to Kieran Trippier about that, and he said, yes, it's not ideal. It's not Benidorm, it's not just round the corner. It is 25 hours away. I can see both sides of it. I don't think it's ideal. I think the players, the management, those on the playing side would rather not do it. But if Newcastle want to be the club they want to be, and they want to be able to say to the partners, we go to Japan, we go to America, we go to Australia, it is a necessary evil, for want of a better phrase. So, yeah, guys, but before then, Newcastle have got this huge game down at Brentford. I'll be there. Now, what do I think is going to happen? I think they'll win. I do. I just think Brentford have got nothing to play for. Even though there were elements about the game on Manchester United on Wednesday that were worrying, a game that was there to win, and they just couldn't do that. They didn't have what Manchester City, and it's Manchester City of course, but what Manchester City showed 24 hours previous at Tottenham, that machine-like ruthlessness and professionalism, that for me just isn't there at Newcastle right now at the moment, away from home. And I would like to see some big players step up on Sunday. Bruno Guimaraes, this is when we know his quality, we know everything that he is, but he's got to grab games like Wednesday night for me, and I don't think he did. And I think he's got to grab this one on Sunday. It's going to need big personalities, big characters to get the win they need. If they do that, that's fine. 7th place is guaranteed, and I'm absolutely convinced the Manchester United team I saw on Wednesday, the Manchester United team I've watched all season, they will get beat off Manchester City in the FA Cup final. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching now. Please do the usual, hit like, comment, subscribe. 500 comments on the game after down at Manchester United on Wednesday. Absolutely brilliant. I'll try to reply to as many as possible over the course of the weekend. But yeah, a lovely day here in Gosforth once more. So what do, guys? Coffee or beer garden? Answers below the line. Okay, see you soon. Bye-bye.